So my name is Michael Ball. If you've watched the presentation, I am Head of Accommodation Services Operations at the University of Lincoln. And we're seeing some of your questions come through, and what I'm not quite clear on, as I was trying to say in the video presentation you've just seen, is that some of the questions may be about general universities, not necessarily a university in Lincoln, because lots of us do the same thing, but a little bit different from time to time. So I'm going to start trying to pick down these questions as we've got them come into the website so far. So there's a question from Thomas, which says, how many people live in one flat? Well, that's very varied, depending on in Lincoln, University of Lincoln, that could be between 3 and 23 people. So depending on which university you're going to go to, you're about what I said in the presentation, finding out who you would be, which kind of accommodation you're liking, because of the size of the apartments or because of its location and things like that. So in this particular question, you would be asking, what's the size of apartment do I want to live in? Do you want to live in a 23-bedroom apartment where there's lots of people and lots of social space, or do you maybe want to be in the average, which is 5, 6, 7, or 8 generally? So that's the kind of average number that you will find across most universities, 6, 7, and 8, I would say. But certainly that's the case in Lincoln at both the locations, at the University of Lincoln and Bishop Grosseteste. And next question says to us, are we allowed to have guests stay in our accommodation? Which right now the answer is no. We're looking at when you may be arriving at university. Hopefully the world has changed and we have a lot more clarity about how we can interact with each other. So what we will have to say is that some of this is guarded by new COVID advice that will be out in September and October of what will be 2021. And it might be, everything is as we used to recall, and people can have visitors for some time. The question comes in two parts. Can I have visitors like mum and dad round at a weekend to see what my flat's like and things like that? That's generally not a problem. Overnight visitors can be, need to be managed differently because of things like fire regulations, and understanding who's in a building, and whether or not people are potentially inconveniencing others. So you as an individual would have a responsibility to be considerate of other people, and you would then need to think about, do other people mind if I have a guest over for a night or not? First of all, you would be needed to check with your other housemates, your flatmates. The second one would be check with your university to make sure that they are okay with visitors. And if you have to, some people ask for a booking in process or an application so that they know who is in the accommodation. So I'm afraid it's not a very clear answer on that one, simply because of we don't quite know what the picture will be like in September of 21. And whichever university you go to will have a slightly different setup to that. Generally, it's not too bad if you're considerate of other people and other people don't feel the need to complain about your visitors, which is why it's often okay for mums and dads to come through, grandmas and uncles and things like that. So I get a question that also says, if you go for catered accommodation, what are the packages you can get? Now, at University of Lincoln, we don't have catered accommodation, and I can't recall just now, but you need to check with every university about Bishop G in Lincoln. But you would normally get, on average, I would say, for those universities that still provide a catered package, a half-board package generally, which is breakfast and evening meal. There are a few that I can think of that will have a full package of breakfast, lunch and evening meal. But you need to work out whether that's okay for you. One of the things to consider about a catered package is about it will have fixed times, it will have fixed locations, and if you get study sessions which clash with those times, are you getting the full value? But for lots of people, it's still a question that comes along because it's very simple. Some halls of residence will still have catering units at some universities that are in the accommodation. So basically you just walk downstairs and you're in your restaurant dining area. But it's a change of face. There are less and less catered options across the country. Most are generally self-catered. Can I specify, another question comes in that says, can I specify a non-alcohol flat or single gender flat? Generally, single gender flat, yes, definitely. Non-alcohol is, again, depending on which university you were thinking of going to, would be dependent if they went that deep into their range of choices. Lots of universities try to match people and their preferences as closely as they can, but not everybody, what actually happens is not everybody is as honest as they should be, so that we can try and get people together. There are lots of universities that have things like quiet halls or even single gender halls in some cases. They may have courses specific, halls specific to courses and things like that. Now, one or two universities have gone further than that to say, you know, what kind of music do you like? What kind of sports do you like? And does that fit you in with a group of people? So definitely you would be able to ask for single gender accommodation. That's, I would say that absolutely all universities will offer an option on that. The alcohol bit of a preference, what other people do, is a bit more difficult to specify and meet. The next question I have is that if I decided not to continue with my studies and leave the university, can I get a refund on my accommodation? And again, I have to say that this depends on which university you go to and what kind of accommodation agreement you're actually presented with. And there are two kinds of accommodation agreement, and they vary across the country in different buildings at different universities. And one is where you would sign up with something that's called a license to occupy. And that license to occupy allows you to use the building while you are a student of the university. So if you were to withdraw or formally interrupt your studies at the university, they would enable you to be released from your accommodation obligations. The other option is an accommodation agreement or tenancy, where you are actually in a fixed term tenancy. And whilst there are things about exceptional circumstances and particular situations, in the main, you wouldn't be released from your accommodation without finding a replacement. So just give me a moment to try and pick up on one or two others. The next one, another broad question, is what is the price range for student accommodation in their first year? Most every university will have something called a fees guide, or the one at the University of Lincoln is called a fees guide. It might be accommodation charges, rent levels, or things like that, but every university will have that displayed against their accommodation on their websites, most definitely. And you will see a range that probably on average in Lincoln, our bottom end price is about £4,000 in various different types of accommodation, and which can go up to £8,000 in a studio apartment, and higher than that in other developments that may have special and grand studio apartments. So there's a wide range of things in the middle of those budgets. I would say the average ensuite room, seeing the most popular choice, I would say at the moment in a shared apartment, will be in the region, depending on where you're going again, £5,000 to £6,000, or maybe 5.5 to 6.5 in this day and age, thinking about the range of prices at many different universities. This is sometimes about size and services, location. So again, getting all of that information, as I said in the video presentation, about what is where, what kind of services, what kind of options and style of rooms are in a building, helps you make your accommodation choices. So doing that research in the first instance is really important for you. Now the next question for us is, if I apply for accommodation late, am I guaranteed a place in halls, or will I have to find my own accommodation? And whilst I'll apologise for the general caveat, as it does depend on where you go, let's give you an example of University of Lincoln has a guarantee which is open until the 1st of September. And you are guaranteed a halls of residence place. Now, lots of universities will have different things, and that's why I talk about you looking at the university websites and making sure you have all of the information, which all of that will be there. And hopefully, after listening to something like this, you'll know what you'll be looking for. So you do need to have an understanding of how their allocation and application process will work. So whilst we offer that guarantee up to the 1st of September, it doesn't necessarily specify a particular hall of residence. It talks about a hall of residence, of which there are many different ones within our portfolio, as it may be within particular other universities. And everybody's date is likely to be a little bit different. And that's why once you've chosen your university, or you're making your understanding of which your university choices are likely to be, then you can basically then work that out, that once I've decided which university I'm going to, I've got a good background on the accommodation options, I can know the dates that I'm applied to. And if you're thinking of right now making those choices of which university, then start looking at the accommodation services websites that are available at every university, because it'll start to give you that range and background for you to start making those choices once you've made your final decision. So next question we have is, do you have commuting accommodation, rooms available for 1 or 2 nights? At the moment, at the University of Lincoln, and probably this is affecting Bishop in Lincoln as well, and lots of us, is that operating in a hotel style basis within our COVID restrictions is very, very difficult, and we're probably not doing it. We're definitely not doing it at the University of Lincoln, but it's not impossible. It does depend on availability sometimes. There are some universities that do have hotels on their sites, which then will have some kind of student package. So you can just book it as a hotel user. And then I think if you're registered as a student, you would get an option. Some have developed older halls of residence into a sort of overnight self-catering options that you can have there. So again, you would mainly you wouldn't normally get that kind of information up front before you started accommodation, but asking the question of when would you be able to get that information. So for us in the University of Lincoln, if we didn't have the COVID restrictions and people would be asking us that now, we would be saying, yes, we can do something. The price range for a 1-night option will range per university, but in normal unrestricted years, shall I call it, then yes, there's usually options. But having said that, if you know what your program is and you can't get an option with the university, booking reasonably well in advance can give you some reasonable options within hotels or guest houses in the area if you're only needing to stay 1 night a week. The next question we have is that, do I have to move out of my accommodation on the holidays? Again, that depends on the accommodation agreement that you have. So for the University of Lincoln, no, you don't. You would sign up for a period of accommodation of 40 or 48 weeks in some cases. Bishop will have some of both options, I think, where some you do have to move out in holidays and some you don't. But again, that's why I try to say to people that they should get that information as early as possible so they understand what their particular needs are. And lots of people do it in different ways. So universities that have high conference business are likely to ask you to leave at Christmas and Easter. It's not that we don't have high conference business. We actually think it's just a little bit simpler for the student experience for you not to have to move everything out at Christmas and Easter. Although it is surprising how many cars get just as full as when they arrived in September at Christmas and Easter. But that's entirely up to you and your preferences there. So you will find options where you do not have to, and you will have other options where you will have to. And doing that research background is important to you, to your information. The next question we have is, can I choose who I live with in university accommodation? And again, lots of universities do this differently. So in our example at the University of Lincoln, when you accept a course, an application for accommodation, an offer of accommodation, sorry, you would get an opportunity to say, I would like to share with whoever your friend might be. But your friend must do exactly the same thing. And as long as two people, sometimes three people, might say we'd like to share with each other, then yes, we would try and do that. We can't guarantee that we can meet everybody's demands and requests, but we certainly try our very best at Lincoln, as I'm sure all of the other universities will. Sometimes you may get into the same building and just be a floor apart in two different apartments, or might be in opposite apartments. But you will find out again, but it is possible to make that request. And in a lot of cases, I'm sure universities would try and accommodate that for you. Now, we have a question that is about, oh no, when should I apply for student accommodation? Again, it's very different right across the country. People do it at different times and different places. So for students who have made a confirmed, this university is their confirmed first choice, they will be able to make an application now. Our application process is open for 2021. Different universities do it at different times. Again, looking on their websites and finding out that date is really important to you as you make your choices. And it will probably ask you to register. It'll be linked to your student ID, or potentially your UCAS reference. You need to check which one, and then you would get an option to make a range of applications. You would make one application with a number of choices, and that again will be different from all universities. Some might ask for two, some might ask for 4 or 5. So again, understanding what your favored choices are is really helpful to you. So what do we get next? As a care leaver, am I able to stay in accommodation all year round? Well, there will be options that will give you to around 48 to 50 weeks in some cases. And you, again, looking at the university websites to work out which buildings offer that will probably start your favoured list. So in the University of Lincoln, we have some options that are at 40 weeks. Now, it's easy to extend in the summer, but you might have to move rooms. So if you applied for something that was 46 or 48 weeks, you will have taken up the most of the year. Now, the bit that happens in the middle there, for me not to say, yes, of course, it's okay, is that at a point, often in December or January, then people will start thinking about rebooking their accommodation for their second year or making a booking for their second year. And you might not decide to stay in the same place. You might decide to live with other friends. You will have made new friends at the university, and you might all agree to go and live in a house together. You might decide to go into a different building or a different accommodation together. And you will then, at some point, be moving out of that year's accommodation into a new accommodation, which will have a 46 or 48 week accommodation agreement starting from around about September, sometime in September, and you would move from one to another potentially. So the 52 weeks is not always there straightforwardly, but it's again, but for people who are coming from a care leaver situation, you should find that your local authority support team would also be contacting the university to try and make sure your process goes through, because sometimes they will be managing some of the funding for the accommodation in the first part of the application. So again, asking your local authority how they do things, checking out with the university how they support care leavers, then gives you the rounded package of which some. So we've dealt with lots of care leavers over the years, and generally we get through. Sometimes they might have to extend a couple of weeks to make that next move on, or if they are going to stay in exactly the same accommodation, they can just stay. So again, checking out that information. So what maintenance support is, the next question is, what maintenance support is provided at the accommodation sites, i.e. if the hot water stops working, what should they do about it? Well, there will be a set of information provided to all of the students as they arrive that will tell them how to contact who they need to contact about any maintenance issues. And that can be, so the University of Lincoln, we have a 24-hour security team who can be a first point of contact. We then have a 24-hour support service with a group of technicians who can go and try and look at what we would call small jobs and keeping things running. So in this example, if it was hot water to an apartment that had its own central heating boiler or hot water boiler, then they would just check to see everything was working okay. And if not, they would then call one of our on-call engineers. And generally we would attend on the day or on the night of having the problem. We're pretty quick at getting to major issues because some of our big buildings, there will be only one supply of hot water. And if that one supply breaks down, then we have hundreds of people who may be affected. So we have quite rapid responses in that respect to minimize the inconvenience to everybody. So generally there will be a set of information provided as people arrive. It will have things in it like, if you have a repair, do this, do the other. It can be online, it can be by telephone, it can be by email. Depending on the seriousness, for something with hot water not working, the advice would be to ring somebody who is marked as a point of contact for taking those calls. I have a next question, which is, do you have a security team available for all the accommodation sites? Do they work 24/7 in case of emergency? So for all, in our example, university managed accommodation at the University of Lincoln, we have a 24/7 security team, as I think I mentioned in another answer. And we also have a team who work from the accommodation services offices who are here 24/7 also. And we're here to support a whole load of things. It might be accidental fire alarms, it might be incidents, it might be breakdowns. And so, yes, there is a response group who can support lots of things. Lots of other universities will have, again, I'll say something similar, but it may be different. You might find where if you went to a university that was what I will call an isolated campus, indifferent to University of Lincoln or Bishop Grotesque University, we're in the middle of a city centre. And therefore we have lots of people moving in lots of different locations. Where you have a campus, they might have their own dedicated patrol. They may well have their own security team that will be on gate entrances in different locations. But yes, there is also generally in most locations a warden service, which is not about actually emergencies, but it's about what I usually describe as a bit of a shoulder to lean on. And if somebody was not comfortable with something that was going on in their apartment, they could contact a warden who's generally been a student before and been a resident in accommodation and can offer an experienced ear, if you like. They then have lots of network contacts and signposting opportunities to all of our other services that will be able to then engage with the student later on. So the next question is, to apply for student accommodation, do I need a guarantor? Now, again, this may be different in different places, but specifically, so on this one, I can't necessarily give you a compare even at Bishop, but it will be on their website and all of the other university websites. University of Lincoln, if you were to apply for university owned managed accommodation, you would not require a guarantor. If you were to think about any of the private options, you may. Most universities, I would say, for their own accommodation, do not require a guarantor, because we understand that you're coming through the university process, through UCAS, through student funding, and therefore you have an element of funding. And when you sign these accommodation agreements as a young person, then you are accepting that liability as well. So it is worthwhile understanding that in some cases, so even for the University of Lincoln, we have a particular option which just doesn't require any advance payment at all. Lots of options will require some form of advance payment to accept the accommodation. We've developed one thinking about family budgets and planning for finances, that one option is available where there is no advance payment and no guarantor, to try and make it as flexible as possible. Now, next question is, how likely is it that I will get my first choice accommodation site? Well, sometimes that can depend on when you're able to apply. If you can apply early in the process. Now, again, lots of universities do this differently. So University of Lincoln would generally work in a date order process, but we've got lots of the same types of rooms in lots of different places. So if you're able to apply earlier, you would generally get a wider choice, is the thing I would say. When does pressure come to bear? Usually around the March, April time is when you would have wanted to have made some of those firm decisions, if you've been able to do so. And again, that will just give you a wider choice. But understanding all of the choices is really important. So for us in Lincoln, and similar to Bishop Grotesque, that there's I have to live on campus, or and I can't live on campus, so actually that's quite upsetting. But understanding that we might have locations that are actually 2 minutes walk from the campus, that are physically off the university campus, but you can see the university, you could throw something at the university, and understanding those distances and what the services are. And generally, they're the same services, they're the same types of rooms, they're the same setup. They just happen to be in a slightly different location that might be one different side of a fence to another. So understanding all of the options and understanding the layout of the university that you're going to would help you broaden your range of choices, to think that you might not mind your first, second, third, or fourth choice in that sense. Now, the next question is a really good question. What am I not allowed to bring to university? Thinking of how I would seriously answer that question, it is generally pets, generally dangerous items, or illegal items. In that sense, there is no real restriction, but you will find lots of information from the university that will give you a range of those things. We at the university at Lincoln have something on accommodation.lincoln.ac.uk, which will actually give you a little bit of a guide of those things, of what you should plan to bring, which might help you to certainly understand whether you should or should not bring something. And using things sensibly, whatever you bring, is an important message, because it just hopefully avoids accidents. So again, that's about checking in with the university. But in the sense of, can I give you an example that might help you out? One student some years ago was a fan of air gun things, and wanted to package his things, the soft pellets or whichever. But actually that creates a bit of a problem if he was to get silly with it. Now, we all told us he would never get silly with it, but we got him to agree that he should hold that at his club, where he was, or with his student union society, and then that solves the problem. So things that we would consider that might end up being dangerous items, illegal items, you then have to consider what size is your room. There are other things you can't bring simply because you can't fit them in the room. For us, at many universities, you will find walkthroughs on social media, and all of the information sites that universities run, that will give you an idea of the shape of the room, the storage within the room, so you can try and think about what you would like to bring. Do we have any car parking spaces at any of the sites? Now, the University of Lincoln and Bishop Grotesque, I believe, has options on car parking on its site. University of Lincoln, in the main, for the majority of our accommodation, does not. University of Lincoln's option with car parking is the development called Valentine Court, but it does have a priority application for nursing and paramedic students in the first instance. University of Lincoln is a city centre as much as is Bishop Grotess is based just off the city centre. So our local authorities, in terms of allowing us car parking, actually suggest that to be a student in Lincoln, you do not need a vehicle, because most of the places you wouldn't need public transport to move around between the city and the university. So if you're coming to Lincoln and you're thinking you need to bring a car, then I think Bishop Grotess do, and we do at our Valentine Court site. It is very limited as well. So you need to try and make sure that you've got all of the information that's at hand to make sure. If you miss out on any of those, you would be wanting to try and make sure, my advice is to come without the vehicle first and then look at car parking solutions that might be suitable to you. There are some, but you need to look and see whether they're okay for you and whether they're affordable to you for cars. So the next question says, if a student loan doesn't come in for whatever reason, will they be able to delay their accommodation payment? And for most university options, I'm very, very sure, with good information and possibly having some evidence of the reason for the delay, or there is a delay if it's coming from Student Finance England, the finance department or the collection organisation for whichever university it is would step the payment back because there was evidence there to show that an appropriate application had been made and there was a formal delay. But there would need to be some evidence given. It can be email correspondence from Student Finance England, it might be a statement from the application, but usually they would step the payment back. The University of Lincoln, I can talk about specifically, they sometimes have been stepped back 2 and 3 months because the student has had a particular difficult challenge with their funding for application. So in the most things, yes. Even with private accommodation providers, I would say with good information and an understanding of what might have gone wrong with their funding application, yes, they would offer some flexibility. But possibly not as long as the university would. The next question says, can I pay for students' accommodation, or must it be out of their bank account or the same kind of thing? Right, okay, so I usually find whichever organisation it is, so whichever university it is, they don't quite mind who pays the money. Because at some point within the acceptance process of accommodation, there will be a need to register payment details. In the University of Lincoln's example, we have a direct debit process that will be filled in on accepting the accommodation. And if that direct debit went to a bank account that was linked to the parent, then we're not going to check that. So that can be whatever account you would wish it to come from. I don't believe anyone would be checking. The most important thing that they're worried about is that the payments are coming through. So what families do need to be aware is it is the student who is responsible for the payment. Whether or not the parent says, but it's me, I'm paying it, that doesn't count. If the payment is delayed, it still affects the student. So in the main, shouldn't be a problem for it to be linked to a parent's bank account if that's how you wanted to do it. I think I've come to the end of my questions, and I now see a note from admins who say, feel free to rep up one higher. So as I can't see any more questions, and I can see, I don't think it's got a time on it. The last question that came in was some minutes ago. I'll say thank you very much for listening. I hope that was helpful. Just please don't forget, wherever and whichever university you're going, there will be an opportunity by email, by phone, even by social media to ask questions. If you're not sure, ask questions. I hope you have a great journey to university and a great experience at university. Thank you very much and good evening.